we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
And I'm Corey Johnson, sitting in for the inimitable Ann Northrup.
Okay, we're not going to try to imitate Ann, but we are going to try to give you the news this week. Thanks for being with us, Corey.
Good to be here.
Nice to see you. A busy news week. We're down to the wire in North Carolina, where the polls open on Tuesday, May 8th. Well, that's election day. People are actually voting now on Amendment 1, which is a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage and more. And it's really getting ugly, but there are some signs of hope.
The U.S. Senate passes the Violence Against Women Act with LGBT inclusion, but the Republican-led House is opposed to that.
That's not very nice. Transgender rights have advanced again in New York State, and there was a breakthrough on the rights of transgender people to certain kinds of health insurance coverage.
In Oakland, a tragedy. A transgender outreach worker, Brandy Martell, was shot to death, and we're going to talk about that. Tragic.
In Russia, activists continue to be arrested for violating local laws that ban gay propaganda. That even includes things like wearing rainbow suspenders.
Things are heating up in the Bradley Manning case, the gay soldier who supposedly leaked documents to WikiLeaks, and we'll talk about that.
We're going to look at the question of whether some Mormons are actually afraid of Mitt Romney getting elected president.
Bishop Gene Robinson, who has been a major leader on gay rights nationally and is a bishop in the Episcopal Church, is stepping down, and one of the three candidates trying to succeed him is openly gay as well.
Got a bunch of new plays to review this week, including a new one with Linda Lavin. There's a new Streetcar Named Desire with Blair Underwood as Stanley. A wonderful Midsummer Night's Dream that you also saw at the Classic Stage Company. And John Lithgow playing the powerful, closeted, gay, mid-century reporter Joseph Alsop in a play called The Columnist.
And we're going to have a guest in the latter part of the show, Anna Oliveira, who's the president of the New York Women's Foundation and is the former executive director of GMHC, Gay Men's Health Crisis, is going to join us.
Right. Okay. So we start with North Carolina. Again, people are already able to do early voting there, and many people have sent their ballots in on this already. But this is Amendment 1, which would not just ban same-sex marriage, but any kind of domestic union other than a marriage. So it's very controversial. You know, it's a mess. If it passes, it's going to be terrible. And the good thing is that the NAACP has come out very strongly against this. The NAACP did not even, in this case, the North Carolina chapter, come out for marriage, but they said this amendment is just about getting people. We're opposed to it. It's it's evil. But things are really terrible down there. And to show you about some of the atmosphere there, we have a videotape of this guy in North Carolina who will show you how he felt about people who vote no on Amendment 1.
Scary. Get ready.
All right, I'm Alex Wiles, and this is my buddy Chase Philman. Right now, there's this amendment trying to be passed, Amendment 1, and it's going to state that marriage is between one man and one woman, which is how it ought to be. So somebody decided it'd be a good idea to put this sign near my house. They ought to know not to put stuff like that near my house. All right, we're just going to have a little talk about the sign today. So, that's how we deal with it around here.
So that's what this crazy guy in North Carolina is doing, is shooting a sign. That's very chilling to watch that, because
disturbing.
It's a very, very violent thing, and it's not any kind of a joke.
Yeah, and the politics in North Carolina are, layered and complicated in that the Democratic National Convention is going to be taking place in Charlotte this summer, where Barack Obama is going to be renominated for the Democratic nomination.
You think so?
Yeah, he will be. And, you know, people thought that North Carolina was one of the few states where we didn't really have a chance on these constitutional amendments. We're battling in Minnesota. We are going to the polls potentially in Maryland, in Washington State.
And Maine.
And in Maine. And people thought North Carolina wasn't going to be close.
And freedom to marry didn't make a real big investment there, as they have in some of these other states. And there's a big story about how, what is his name, Chris Hughes, who's a gay guy who's also very involved in the whole marriage movement, also was not giving to this because his attitude is, if you can't win, I ain't giving. But it's actually it looks like it could be close in North Carolina, and therefore we could win.
Chris Hughes was one of the founders of Facebook, and he and his fiancée, Sean Eldridge. Sean Eldridge is a senior advisor at Freedom to Marry, was the political director there for a few years, and they've been deeply invested in the marriage fights nationally. And there's been a piece about, he hasn't given at this point, they've done a tremendous amount nationally across the country for the community. And the most recent polling shows from public policy polling that the numbers are inching up for our side, the opponents of the measure. I think opposition is now at 40%, which is the high mark at this point, and they think it could be very close. It all depends on turnout and what happens there. And as you said before, the NAACP has come out against it.
And a whole bunch of black clergy have come out against it.
And black voters are going to make a big difference on whether or not this gets defeated.
Right. And then there's the Pew poll, the new Pew poll, P-E-W poll, which says that support for same-sex marriage is at 47% with 43% opposed. And just 10 years ago, it was 57 opposed and 35% support. So we're making progress there, especially among people born after 1981. 63% support that. So they say
That's me. I was born in 82.
Wow, good. And happy birthday,
Thank
Corey.
you.
And happy birthday to Ann Northrup.
We share a birthday. Ann Northrup and I share a birthday.
Oh, my goodness.
And we're almost the same age.
Only people born on April
28th.
Well, I think Ann's the 29th.
Oh, is she?
Oh, Ann, you'll call us up and let us know. Because we are live today on Tuesday. For those of you who are watching this, actually, we're doing this show live. It's taped for the rest of the week because this is May Day, and there are all kinds of protests going on in New York, et cetera. And we are a part of that with our show. Let's see what else. Well, and then there was the story of the Marine at Camp Pendleton. He comes home, and his partner, who's a man, who was thrown out of the Navy for being gay, gets down on bended knee in front of everybody with photographers going off and proposes marriage. And the guy said yes. You're lucky about that he said yes. Because on Smash this week, the woman did not say yes to her partner. No, it's just going to be very embarrassing. But this was really, and these guys were on CNN. And if we didn't have so much else news on the show, we'd be showing you a tape of how charming they are.
It's amazing the stories that have come out since the repeal actually happened and it was implemented last summer. The stories have been amazing that we've seen about LGBT people actually being able to serve openly. And, I think there were stories about LGBT people bringing their partners to these balls and showing up when their partners are returning home. Like in this story, it's less than a year later from implementation, and it's going quite well. And I think these stories are very moving.
The amazing thing, of course, was that people have been out in the military for a long time, and in certain sectors they were tolerated, and and occasionally, they invoke this policy against them. Usually, if you just wanted to get rid of somebody. Of course, don't forget the policy was mostly used against women, many of whom were not lesbians, but their commanders didn't like having women serving under them, so they called them lesbians and threw them out. It's something we may want to talk about with Ana Oliveira later in the show.
A stain that's finally gone.
That stain is finally gone. What are they going to do now about, against women in the military? Because there's still a lot of intolerance and abuse and all that other kind of stuff. All right, let's on to some other news besides marriage. Well, we've been telling everybody for weeks about the Tennessee Don't Say Gay bill, this bill where you can't talk about homosexuality in any way, shape, or form in the classrooms, even though it's not exactly like people were doing it before. Well, they've actually dropped it. A key GO sponsor announced that they simply weren't going to bring it up. I think they finally realized it was overkill, and we hope the one in Missouri goes down as well. In Pennsylvania, they have elected their first out gay legislator. I mean, he actually has to, I think, go through the November election, but he won the primary, and it's tantamount to election. His name is?
Brian Sims.
What do you know about Brian?
He ran a very impressive campaign. He was a Victory Fund endorsed candidate.
And a former board member there, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. And his district encompasses a major part of Philadelphia and some of the gay neighborhoods in Philadelphia.
And he's a civil rights advocate and policy attorney. That looks like another Victory Fund endorsed candidate, Chris Dietz, is also going to be unopposed in the Democratic primary in District 104 there, so we may get two.
Two, and it's the first two ever elected in the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And one of the things the Victory Fund points out, and others have pointed out, until you get out gay people elected in these legislatures, you often don't get the legislation that you need and want. You know, I mean, Minnesota had out gay legislators from the early '70s, and they were able to pass some things. Of course, they do have a problem with marriage out there.
Alan Speer. Right?
Alan Speer, I think, was the first out gay legislator in the country anywhere. We'll check on that. But he came out after getting elected, and he eventually became the, I believe, the head of the Senate.
Yep, he was the Democratic leader in the Senate in Minnesota.
Right. A bunch of U.S. senators are asking the Department of Defense to streamline the process to correct the discharge documents for veterans dismissed under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, because and it's going to remove references to homosexual, that this was the reason that you were thrown out, and glad they're cleaning all that up.
And it's Joe Lieberman's one of the people getting it done, one of his last acts in office, actually.
Well, Joe Lieberman, and we weren't great fans of Joe in many respects, but on the Don't Ask, Don't Tell thing, he played a leadership role.
That's right.
All the way along there.
Yep.
As an independent, and he bridged some. Okay. How about the story about the fact that the Human Rights Campaign got a hold of the tax returns for the National Organization for Marriage, which included some of their donors and things like that? This is apparently illegal, and they're asking for a federal investigation. There's already an investigation by the IRS. HRC removed it from their website, so you can't see it there, but apparently you can go around and see if you can find it on the Huffington Post. They've still got them up there.
And the National Organization for Marriage, as most folks probably know, is the organization that was headed by Maggie Gallagher. Brian Brown is still the head, and they are, the most notorious gay haters fighting in support of these amendments nationally across the country. I apologize for smiling on a committed, supposedly illegal act in obtaining these, but these folks are the worst of the worst when it comes to battling our community. And what do they have to hide? What do they have to hide? It's important to know who's opposing us.
Well, here's a question. I mean, do we release the donors for HRC and all those groups? Is that all public record?
I'm not sure it's public record, but I don't think HRC or any of the national LGBT groups or even statewide groups would have an issue with that.
Yeah,
we have nothing to hide. We're on the right side of history. We have nothing to hide.
Left side, I hope.
The left side of history. You got me there.
No, I'm just kidding. All right. More news about this. The pressure is still on for President Obama to issue this executive order, which would cover government contractors. And there are, we've talked about it for a couple of weeks now, but we're not going to let up on this. And it seemed to be the reason they didn't want to do it was because some of the contractors are faith organizations and things like that, and then they'd get into a whole thing. And some people said, well, then they'd revive the whole bathroom debate over transgenders and which bathrooms people are going to use, and they'd use attack ads against him. Well, some of that, first of all, he's for covering everybody through the Employment Non-Discrimination Act anyway, so they could run those ads anyway. And there have been surveys done of government contractors, and it looks like 86% of the top federal contractors already ban discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, and 55% on the basis of gender identity.
It's disappointing, very disappointing. I think it was an easy move for the president to do this. Supposedly, the internal politics, the Justice Department was on board, the Labor Department was on board, and I guess it was probably in the end a political decision. In the end, I feel very strongly we have to reelect the president, but I don't think this was going to in any way damage his ability to be reelected. I think it was an easy one.
I think people know that he's pro-homosexual. I think they know that already. I think they suspect he's for same-sex marriage too, even though he says he's not.
In evolution.
Well, all right, let's talk about the Boy Scouts. Jennifer Terrell, we told you about her. This is the Cub Scout troop leader out lesbian who they found out about her and they got rid of her, and she's been getting a lot of support. Oh, that's my phone. That's how I'll turn that off. I thought I had that on silence. Ann often chides me about that for leaving my phone on, but I'm not going to take the call, Ann. Anyway, the Scout leader who was thrown out, 250,000 Americans have signed a petition to get her back in. And this week we had the development of a board member of the Boy Scouts in Ohio, his name is David Sims, resigning and saying her removal goes against my fundamental beliefs of how we should treat our fellow human beings. Now, I have to wonder about this, though. The Boy Scouts are pretty famous for having an anti-gay policy.
The Boy Scout decision, Evan Wolfson, who founded Freedom to Marry, was one of James Dale's lawyers in 2000 in the Boy Scout case, was decided, I believe, 6-3 against us and in favor of the Boy Scouts, allowing them to deny gay people the ability to be part of the organization. And you would think that 12 years later, with the massive amount of change throughout the country on equal rights for gay people, that the Boy Scouts would catch up. They haven't. This woman, though, Jennifer Tyrell, who the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, GLAAD, really has put out there nationally as a spokesperson on this, is incredibly mediagenic, is just a Midwestern mom from Ohio wanting to help her son and serve in the community. I think this continues to give a black eye to the Boy Scouts and shows how far they're lagging on this really easy issue.
Well, it's not easy because the Mormons essentially run the Boy Scouts. If you are a Mormon boy, you have to join the Boy Scouts. That's their youth program. And the other big group that is in the Boy Scouts is Catholics. So when that's the predominant constituency, that's why we have so many problems with it.
I was a Boy Scout.
Were you?
Yep.
Good. Well, I didn't join.
Cub Scout, Boy Scout, Weeblo.
As I've mentioned, my father was the first Cub Scout in the United States, but back in 1920-something. But anyway, the other thing that they released this week is the fact that back in, we're talking about Mitt Romney now, in 1994, when he was running for Senate, he said, I feel that all people should be allowed to participate in the Boy Scouts regardless of their sexual orientation. Now, on the other hand, he said, I support the right of the Boy Scouts to decide what it wants to do on that issue, meaning if they want to be discriminatory, they can be discriminatory. So now, actually, Jennifer, the mom is saying, hey, if Romney can do this, why can't, where does Obama stand on this? Because, you know, the president actually has some sort of titular role with the Boy Scouts. You know, I mean, again, the Boy Scouts have this legal right to discriminate, but we should be isolating them. I don't think the president should be the head of the Boy Scouts anyway.
Some things never change. Mitt Romney was taking two sides to the issue in 1994. 18 years later, he's still doing the same thing.
94, yeah.
94 when he was running against Ted Kennedy in Massachusetts for Senate. And I think we've seen over and over again, back in 94, Romney was trying to get gay people, trying to run to the left of Kennedy on gay rights in Massachusetts.
I am going to be better than Ted Kennedy on gay rights, he said.
Yeah, we've seen how that has played out.
Yes. And do you think the Log Cabin
I'm from
Club,
Massachusetts.
Do you think the Log Cabin Club will endorse Romney? They seem to be disposed towards
yeah.
him. But he is for this constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage. He opposes civil unions as well. I mean, they didn't endorse George Bush, W. Bush,
the second term,
for that reason.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, Romney, no one has pinned Romney down on a real kind of easy issue that you think they would nail him down on, which is ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. No one said to Romney, where do you stand on passing the Employment Non-Discrimination Act? The Republicans in the House won't allow it to come up for a vote.
He probably thinks it's part of the war on religion.
Oh, my God.
You know, so to speak.
But someone, you know, in one of these debates coming up, Brian Williams or Chuck Todd or one of these folks that moderate the debates and ask questions, they should ask him, where do you stand on ENDA? Because ENDA support nationally among Democrats, Republicans, independents, even probably evangelicals, it's really high. It's not a hot button marriage issue, and they should get him on that and see where he stands.
Okay. Now, the United States Senate did a good thing this week, and they reauthorized the Women's Violence Act. This is the thing against domestic violence, and they kept in the protections that include LGBT folks in it, which is very, very important to us. But this is what the House doesn't want to do. They don't want that. And there's a couple of other things they don't want in their version. So we're going to see how they're going to be reconciled.
And this is major because it's actually the first time the act being reauthorized, the first time LGBT people have been included in the act. They weren't included previously. Of course, not surprising, Democrats control the Senate. We were included. Republicans control the House. They don't want us included. There'll be a fight over it. We'll see how it gets authorized in the end when they have to reconcile the bills.
Well, and the same thing is true in New York State, where the Democrat-controlled Assembly, for the 5th time, passed the Gender Identity and Expression Non-Discrimination Act, all right, for the 5th time. Although it passed 80 to 55, some people think that vote was a little closer, actually, than in some past years. Maybe Democrats have lost a little power. But now it's expected not to do anything in the Senate, which is controlled by the Republicans?
Yeah, that's the...
Even though they did marriage last year?
They did marriage because, excuse me, they had major fear that gay donors nationally would come in and target them if they didn't pass marriage. And so, in the end, a deal was cut to take the gay money off the table and opposing them so they could hold on to power. I don't think the same fear is instilled as it relates to passing a transgender rights bill. Sadly, when the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act was passed in 2002, Governor George Pataki, a Republican, the state Senate controlled by Republicans back then, and the Assembly controlled by Democrats, this deal was passed, and gender identity expression was not included at the time. Now we're 8 years later, and we still can't pass basic protections for trans New Yorkers. It's a real travesty.
It is covered in New York City and a number of other cities in the state of New York.
A bunch of localities have it.
And now the EEOC says that this is something that needs to be covered.
That was a big deal, that EEOC decision last week.
We did talk about that last week, and it was a big decision. Of course, that's not going to stop the kind of violence that a lot of transgender folks face, and this week we had the terrible story of Brandy Martell, a black transgendered woman found shot to death in downtown Oakland. There was a witness to some kind of an altercation that took place, but Brandy was an outreach worker there in the transgender community, so she was probably doing her work, got some fight with these guys, and there are just so many of these violent things against. We'll have more details about that, I hope, next week. But there was some good news in that Aetna has finally said, transgenders can have mammograms covered. Mammograms! Like they were treating mammograms like there was some kind of gender reassignment surgery or something. This is terrible. So no, basically they've agreed to cover all medical procedures except gender reassignment surgery.
And initially, Aetna had turned this trans person down for the coverage of a mammogram, and then in working through the Transgender Legal Defense Organization, they reversed their decision and came down on the right side of things. Hopefully, other healthcare providers across the country will follow Aetna's lead and cover mammograms for trans people.
Okay.
Trans women.
We've talked about the fact that the right-wing Republicans have passed a lot of laws to restrict the right to vote, mainly with voter ID laws. You better check it out for yourself, folks. If you don't have certain kinds of identification, you may not be able to vote this year. And this is a special problem for people of transgender experience. So one of our viewers wrote and said, one of the ways to get around that is to submit an absentee ballot. And then,
smart. I never thought of that.
Well, I
Smart.
didn't think about it either. But I mean, you shouldn't have to do that. You should
No.
be able to show up at the polls, sign your name, and vote. But Republicans, especially, and some Democrats, are making it harder and harder to vote, mainly because they want to get rid of Obama this year. And we've got to turn that around. We've got to get rid of them so we can change those laws back.
There was a big story in the Times last week about how this actually may affect the election in some way in some of these key swing states like Virginia, North Carolina, and some states that are on the cusp. They're purple states.
Absolutely.
Where there are large minority populations that potentially you think would come out heavily for the president, but with these terribly restrictive and I think bordering on racist policies, it may actually affect the election in some way.
And the sad thing is that a lot of them have been upheld by the courts, these restrictions. All right, continuing on transgender folks, we first have the picture of, Patricia Dye. Now, this is Patricia, I don't know to the extent to which transgendered, but essentially posed this is a 32-year-old female who posed as a 16-year-old boy to get a 16-year-old girl. This was all, adjudicated last year, and she got a sentence, and then she fled and violated probation. Now she says she's not going to do it anymore.
It's disturbing, and I don't know if she identifies as trans, but regardless, it's really, I think, pretty sick to be posing as someone else to try to have a relationship with a teenager, and it's insane. And
had to register as a sex offender. Then there's the case of, we have the picture of Thomas Beattie, the pregnant man there on the left. We've gone over this story. Thomas has had a couple of kids because never completely went through gender reassignment surgery and everything like that. So yes, a man, but also a female who has female reproductive organs and was producing children, and married to Nancy Beattie, but apparently they are filing for divorce.
This story, when it came out, sort of rocked the LGBT rights world, and the trans movement had some real concerns about how it was being portrayed. It's a little, I guess, complicated in that Thomas is a trans man who, as you said, didn't have gender reassignment surgery and is still able to become impregnated. Right. And as identifying as a man, still had 2 kids.
Well,
it's complicated.
Very, very, very complicated, because people can't change their sex, and I think by using the word transsexual, we sometimes make mistakes about that. People are on a gender spectrum, but sex just means, do you produce eggs? Do you produce sperm? Well, Thomas was producing eggs.
Eggs. That's right.
So anyway, but the issue is that Nancy apparently was physically attacking him on multiple occasions.
Allegedly.
Well, sure, it's all to be adjudicated, but they're filing for divorce. Bradley Manning case is going to be tried in September 21st through October 12th. He is losing all of his motions to get anything dismissed. The government really wants to get this guy. In the WikiLeaks case. A horrible story from Vandalia, Ohio, where men, mostly from Dayton, have been arrested in a sex sting in Miami Township, where they try to find men engaging in sex in a park. Again, they don't do this to heterosexual couples. Nope. It's always against people who were gay who were doing this, and it's an outrage. In some cases, Lambda goes after them for that.
And we saw, I think there was a report, it may have been last week or this week, on the Palm Springs Police Department, who had been doing this in a systematic way, targeting gay men in Palm Springs, which is, as we know, a huge gay population there. And what the documents have shown is that it was targeted, systemic, and this is illegal. It should be illegal for people to be targeting gay people this way, because it's what you said. There's this complete double standard involved, where they're not doing this in these lover lanes places where straight couples are going and doing whatever they do.
Right. Okay. Then there's the story. I just read this on, I believe it was Salon, where there are actually these Mormons who have great misgivings about having Mitt Romney as president, because he has moved so far to the right, and they feel it's going to hurt the image of the religion. You should have thought about that when you went after Prop 8. Well, partly it is Prop 8, because it says that the Mormons have pulled back on some of these other marriage initiatives.
That's right.
Because they feel like they got burned. They thought, we're coming out for heterosexual marriage, who's going to be against that? But it did hurt them, and they're also concerned about a guy like Mitt Romney getting elected. So I hope you lose the Mormon vote, Mitt.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, as you said, in the money that came out of Utah and some of the other western states that went to go fund the passage of Prop 8 in 2008 was enormous, and they've pulled back a bit. And after that happened, Equality Utah came up with an initiative called the Common Ground Initiative, where they're able to actually work with the Church of Latter-day Saints in Utah and coming up with some common ground, like employment non-discrimination, where they're able to pass, I think it was around 17 municipalities throughout Utah.
And you would think those Utah legislatures, who were mostly Mormon, would do what they're told, but they haven't passed statewide bills.
No statewide bill.
Right, but
the Mormons control, I don't know if control is the right word. They have significant sway over the politics in Utah.
But they haven't pushed that. Big controversy this week with Dan Savage, the sex columnist, and he also runs the It Gets Better program. So Dan was speaking at the National High School Journalism Convention. He was invited there to speak about anti-gay bullying, basically, and the It Gets Better thing. And then he launched into a tirade against the Bible. We have problems with the Bible ourselves, but in attacking the Bible's support for slavery and things like that, he used the word BS. And he used the full word, and we don't say it on this show, a couple of times. And of course, we would probably say it's a bunch of BS too. I wouldn't say it's BS, I'd say it's hateful or whatever. But it caused a walkout there. And when people were walking out, he said, oh, the pansy-ass people who were walking out. Well, he apologized for that one. But it's caused a whole brouhaha. I think if you've been invited to speak about anti-bullying, that you might have phrased it a little differently. But that's Dan.
That's Dan. That's who Dan is. I think the substance of his remarks was about how the Bible is deeply hypocritical when it comes to many issues, from slavery to the way you treat women to when you can eat pork and shellfish. And he was trying to point that out. I think he unnecessarily went over a line in using BS, and also when these students walked out, calling them a name, right, which just seems...
Some of our viewers think I'm a little anti-Christian myself. I was raised Catholic, and I have a lot
I
of
was
issues.
too. I was raised Catholic.
Yeah, I have a lot of issues with the way the church deals with these things. And Dan was saying, hey, you're attacking me. I have a right to defend myself, and you do, but I think he could have used better words. Staying on the church thing, we talked about Gene Robinson stepping down, retiring, and they've got 3 candidates up to replace him, and one of them is openly gay, Reverend William Rich, Senior Associate Rector at Trinity Church in Boston, and married, a married gay man. So the controversy continues in the Anglican Communion. Horrible story out of Utah about this young kid was giving a talk, Alex Smith, 18, at an audience in Utah about bullying, and not knowing that his own boyfriend had committed suicide that day. A young man named Jack Denton Reese, 17. Gay teen suicide isn't going to stop overnight. I worry about giving too much attention to these things, putting their pictures up, running their videos, all these other kinds of things, because we don't want people to think that they're going to go out in a blaze of glory if they do, and they're going to get all this attention. We don't want you to kill yourself, and we don't want to just say it gets better when you're older. We're trying to make it better for you now in your schools and in the situations. I went to the what is it called? Live Out Loud program thing, where they go into the schools. They ask you to go back to your old high school and talk to the kids there. And I have friends who do that. But they also gave scholarships to 5 kids, and boy, were they amazing. These high school kids from the metropolitan area going to Harvard and University of Chicago and Hunter and other places. And they're just so involved at such a young age, and it's terrific.
Yeah, and these stories, I think we just hear the tip of the iceberg, actually. There was that sort of rash of suicides the media covered, what was it, about a year and a half ago maybe, where you had 8 to 10 LGBT teens who had committed suicide, and it's gut-wrenching and terrible. And then you had that Jamie Rodmeyer case, and you had the
Tyler Clementi
case at Rutgers.
Jim McGreevey came out for not throwing the book at Ravi over the Tyler Clementi case. Well, although it wasn't.
But one thing I think that gay adults really need to focus on is helping LGBT young people. It's 2012, and we're so focused on marriage and employment, and Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. But we have a huge amount of young people that live in unsupportive places in this country who aren't able to be themselves, who feel threatened and are bullied on a daily basis, and we're losing lives. And at some point, I think our community needs to stand up and say we need to take care of our young people.
I think a lot of them are doing a great job of standing up for themselves, is what I'm saying.
Yes, they are.
And forming peer groups. And news from Florida that Jacksonville may take up its bill to protect people on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity next week. Robert Spitzer, the guy who did the supposed study saying ex-gay stuff might work, finally, we talked about it already, but he finally wrote his long apology letter to everybody and saying, "Oh, sorry if you tried that therapy, it doesn't work."
It only took him 11 years to write the study came out in 2001, and when it came out, it was deeply, deeply damaging because he was this well-respected psychologist, psychiatrist who put out the study saying, you can change, here's how you can do it, I've seen it happen. 11 years later, how many lives have been ruined by his study? How many people have been tormented because of his study? He should go on a tour across the country saying, I really messed up. I'm sorry for all the people I hurt. I don't think this is enough.
Right. In New York, we told you about Senator Carl Kruger, who voted against same-sex marriage and then voted for same-sex marriage. But he'd already was indicted for corruption charges. He's getting 7 years in jail. And where are we? In Cleveland, this radio announcer goes on and he told a father who saw his daughter kissing another girl, you should get one of your friends to screw your daughter straight. Well, GLAAD got on this case. The guy apologized and apparently has been disciplined, but that is like outrageous. Well, but let's just do a couple of international things and before we get to our guest. Iran is all upset that Azerbaijan might have a gay parade. They think it's influenced by Israel. I mean, it's just too much. I'd be very surprised if they do have a parade there. And they passed another anti-gay law in the Novosibirsk region of Russia. This is an anti-gay propaganda law. And in St. Petersburg, where they've had this law, 11 to 17 people, we're not sure exactly how many, were arrested for anti-gay propaganda, and that includes things like wearing rainbow suspenders. Some of these people were part of a general kind of a parade on a peaceful demonstration, and they were just part of it, and the police pulled them out of the parade because they saw rainbow flags and said you're engaging in public homosexual propaganda. Well, this is terrible.
It's crazy in Russia.
And we are going to turn to our guest now. Hey, welcome, Anna. How are you doing? Anna Oliveira.
Good to see you.
For those of you who don't know or weren't watching at the beginning of the show, Anna Oliveira is the president and chief executive officer of the New York Women's Foundation, which has been around for a long time.
Yes.
And you are also a former executive director of the Gay Men's Health Crisis.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
How's that war on women going?
Well, I hope that I would say we are, to use the war metaphor, holding forth and hopefully advancing a little bit. I think that it's been very disheartening in some ways, like LGBTQ rights. We make progress, and then all of a sudden there is a backlash in an unexpected way, which has really, it's really teaching us how important it is to not only advance laws and protections, but to continue to shore up what we have.
So how does the New York Women's Foundation deal with that? And you mainly deal with the 5 boroughs of New York.
Yes, yes.
But you do some things that have national impact. And I know you're focused on raising women out of poverty and justice for women. Mm-hmm. But how do you turn that around with your foundation?
So the foundation, what we do is we try to be very smart and fund leaders and organizations in New York that are fierce organizers, fierce responders, be to poverty, be to sexual violence, be to gender-based violence, be to youth needs, as well as older folks' needs. And this for us is about women. It's certainly about the queer community as well, gender issues in general. We fund LGBT organizations. Trans programs are very important for us. Youth programs are very important for us. So our job is to be bold enough and courageous enough to invest in those that others don't feel safe enough yet to invest.
All right, so give us some examples of the kinds of things that you think are really innovative and making a difference.
Mm-hmm. So, for instance, in the case of investing in responses that are coming from the ground up, 7 years ago, New York Women's Foundation invested in Domestic Workers United. Domestic Workers United was doing what many thought was not possible to be done, and that is organizing domestic workers because they are spread around. Well, it is a union-like It's not exactly a union, but it is that kind of organizing and bringing together around shared goals. Through that work, they passed in New York State the most far-reaching Bill of Rights for domestic workers, which then they went national. They're now a national organization passing the same kinds of laws in California, moving to Washington State and throughout the country, and launching an incredible campaign called Caring Across Generations, which not only works with domestic workers, but caretakers in general.
And the New York Women's Foundation were one of the first organizations to invest in them, to get them off the ground?
That's right, Corey, and that's exactly what we do.
You know, I was out covering actually a gay demonstration out in Queens, and I ran into a bunch of domestic workers, but they said they were being trafficked by the diplomatic corps to work almost as slaves, not as sex slaves, but as domestic slaves in embassies and things like this. Have you heard about this?
Yes, we have, and in another part of the work of the foundation, the anti-violence part, we are actually engaged in anti-trafficking issues, funding organizations that organize them, protect them, that seek to identify them, and that can be in people's homes, that can be in nail salons, that can be in a variety of places. So we fund a lot of immigrant groups, we fund a lot of groups, they're first responders, you know, because what you encounter there are people that have a hard time becoming public and seeking large institutions or going to the police because they have other vulnerable situations in their lives. You know, they have sometimes immigration issues, they have, in the case of a diplomatic thing, that's how they get their visa. That's how they are in the country. So the foundation's job is really to support leadership to make these changes, and that's what we're doing.
Talk about the focus in the LGBT community, because you have a long record of this at the Women's Foundation. And what's the focus there? What kind of funding is available for what kinds of things? And what are you doing?
Absolutely. So we are funding, we have been funding and continue to fund a diverse number of organizations. So for instance, we funded Fierce for 5 years. Very important.
Fierce, which is young people on the ground.
Absolutely.
They are fierce, but that's their name.
They're very fierce. They're very fierce. It is their name, it's their energy, it's contribution, enormous role modeling that they bring to all of us. We funded the Audre Lorde Project. We funded Queers for Economic Justice, QUJ. We are now funding Kaylin Lord in the Trans Justice Program there. We are working with Hattrick Martin, began to fund Hattrick Martin now in this cycle that just began.
Hattrick Martin Institute for LGBT Youth, where Ann and I used to work years ago.
And they are expanding their work with women and trans youth. So we like to support initiatives that others are not going to support right away.
It sounds like you're going for the most vulnerable members of the community.
Always.
And a lot of these groups are groups that don't have enormous staffs or development staff. They're folks that really rely on these investments, and it's a lot of bang for the buck in helping these organizations.
Yes, Anti-Violence Project as well is in our, a grantee partner now. And what happens, Corey, what you just said is very important. What the foundation does, we're a public foundation. So we engage New Yorkers. We believe that problems and solutions live in the same place. That actually folks that are living issues know the answers. And that our job is to mobilize resources and opportunities for them to manifest, the solutions that they want to create. So we do act as a surrogate development department for small organizations, because we get other donors to put their monies together and we invest in a reliable manner.
All right, well, let's talk about AIDS a little bit. You do AIDS funding now.
We do AIDS funding.
We're in the 30th year of the pandemic. Infections are going up, particularly among women of color.
Yes.
You served at GMHC. What kinds of things do you find are actually making a difference in turning those numbers around, or is that something that you focus on?
We are. We have been funding for years SMART. We've been funding the Young Women's HIV Collective. SMART is a group of women who are HIV positive for the most part, working to organize and educate others. It's a small organization that actually lives in at the Fund for the City of New York, which is an incubator, fantastic organization. So we fund projects that are really very close to the ground. The Young Women's HIV Collective, for instance, is one, or the Alison Gertz Foundation, and we fund them all. It's really important for us because what we see is that the peer-to-peer, and this is a long tradition in AIDS, right? Like with like, is using the credibility that one brings out of one's life to get the other person engaged, to get the message across.
It is certainly what works, but one of the things I've seen in covering this thing for 30 years
Yes.
is that people with AIDS have or HIV have essentially, most of them, gone back in the closet or are in the closet because they're well. They're relatively well. They don't. In the old days, you got you told people because you're going to die in a couple of years, and that's not true anymore.
Right.
There's so much less visibility around AIDS.
Right.
Is there
Because of the social stigma involved? Of
no,
identifying as HIV positive?
because you could tell people before because you couldn't hide it really.
Yes.
You were going to
Yes.
die.
Yes.
Now you're going to live, so why tell everybody? It will interfere with your employment, your family,
Yes.
whatever.
Yes.
So how do you overcome that?
You know, I mean, it's a very paradoxical thing, right? For so many years, we fought so hard to get the medications, to get the research and the medications and accessibility to good medications so that people could live and not die, which we're very happy about. But so, you know, becoming this whole discussion about being a chronic manageable disease, right, or not. In the lives of young people, it's not always that simple, right? Having an illness, having a disease that we can cope with is incredible progress. Preventing the disease is even further progress because it robs people of a quality of living, right? And it robs people of an ability to have more options in their lives. I mean, we're very happy with what we have. But the work of the foundation is more on the prevention aspect. And in our case, I will tell you that we see that HIV and AIDS is really embedded with poverty and exclusion, you know, racial exclusion.
From the beginning.
Gender exclusion, yes. Gender non-conforming youth is much more vulnerable for HIV and AIDS today. You know, young women of color are much more vulnerable. So it's a discourse about their lives, right? It's investing in the value of their lives, it's investing in the next generation. I mean, I think that both in the women's movement, but also in the LGBT community, you know, and in crossing all of us cross so many communities, right? We really have to pay attention to the next generation. We have to pay attention to the kind of city we are creating in New York. I don't have to say much about the 199%, and we must shift that in the city, but also in our communities, right? The longevity, the kind of life that we want young folk that are coming to be able to have.
Right. We're finishing up, but you also played a role in the defeat of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You funded a women's service members group.
We are very proud to be funding Service Women Action Network. They are on the cutting edge. They evidently have been very active in the Don't Ask, Don't Tell and demolishing that barrier, but also, you know, with women veterans and also with the issue of sexual assault, any kind of sexual violence, intimidation, threatening in the military, which is a huge, huge secret.
So we've got a long way to go on that, even though
Got a long way to go, but
we're
we're happy to be on the way.
And you're having your big dinner, your big breakfast next week. You got Hillary Rodham Clinton speaking there on May the 10th. How can people learn more about your organization?
Please go to our website.
Which is?
It's www.nywwomen'sfoundation.org.
It must feel good every day to do this type of work. I mean, you're helping save lives, and you're making New York a much better city for a lot of people who don't have the bullhorn that a lot of folks have.
It's a privilege to be able to give voice to those who are doing the work a little bit and to invest resources. It's a privilege to be able to
And I just want you to know, we usually have a woman co-host on this show.
I know, I miss Ann, but we like to see you too, Corey. Yes, yes.
But it's very good to have you,
Thank
Anna.
you so much.
Ann is irreplaceable.
And thank you for your great work.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you so much.
We'll go on with the news and
Thank you.
bid you goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, you can slide out there, and we just have a couple of other things to cover here. Well, you know, ACT UP had its
25
anniversary demonstration down there on Wall Street. Well, started at City Hall, you know, they had over 1,000 people. I mean, in the beginning, like at 11 o'clock in the morning. Well, first of all, a bunch of people got arrested downtown protesting on Wall Street. Then some people on Housing Works got arrested trying to set up a house near City Hall because they're trying to get funding for something called HASA for All, meaning that you would get AIDS services from the city just because you're HIV positive, not necessarily progressing to AIDS, so that you won't progress to AIDS. That's one of their big things. And, you know, Larry Kramer, we have a picture. Larry Kramer was down there, speaking to the crowd, and he said, anger is healthy. Anger is your friend, you know. It's the healthiest thing we can do as activists is be angry. And he's been angry for a long time.
Well, you and Ann were very much involved in ACT UP.
Ann was very bad. I was in ACT UP for about a year, and then I continued to do gay rights work.
Well,
Ann was a mainstay.
Ann was one of the lieutenants of ACT UP.
She absolutely was.
And you were involved. And one of the things that I wish I was around for was ACT UP. You know,
you don't wish you were around for those early days of the AIDS crisis, brother.
I mean,
you don't.
No, I'm not saying that I wanted to live through all that tragedy and death.
Well, that's why people were out there.
But what I'm saying is that ACT UP, 25 years, one of the most inspirational civil disobedience, direct organizing organizations that this country and this city has ever seen. And Larry says it, and it's true, ACT UP saved hundreds of thousands of people's lives, millions of people's lives because of getting access to these drugs that were needed to save people.
And there are a bunch of films that people can see about that are out now. You know, one from David France, one from Jib Hubbard, and Sarah Schulman.
Have you seen them?
I haven't seen the ACT UP film essentially, but I do hope to see it soon. I haven't been able to make those screenings because I've been going to too many damn plays, as you know.
You like that, though.
Well, you know.
You like that.
When you have to go to the theater all the time, you have to sit through a lot of crap, as you know. So, but there were some gems this week, and we both saw one of them.
Yes.
Well, actually, let me get the rundown. Yeah, if you want to run this picture, we saw A Midsummer Night's Dream at the Classic Stage Company. You know, they never cease to amaze me with what they're able to do. That's Taylor Mack there on the right and Anthony Held on the left. I mean, it's very hard to describe this production. I mean, if you think you know A Midsummer Night's Dream, or even if you're not too crazy about Shakespeare sometimes, this really bring you back to it. And it's got a star-studded cast. It's got Christina Ricci,
Bebe Neuwirth.
Yeah, I mean, so they get and David Greenspan, who's really the king of character actors. But the great thing about it is that it's like they thought through every line of this play and made you see it a new way. And it was also very sexy.
There were two guys who were almost naked,
which is even better than being naked.
You said it, for a large portion of the show. And first of all, the theater itself is a great theater.
Intimate.
Very intimate. And the performances, I went when they were only in their 6th night of previews, and I thought it was completely fantastic. And I'm not, a Shakespeareophile, but I really enjoyed it, and I recommended it to friends who went and saw it and really loved it. Go see it.
Tony Speciale is the director there.
He's openly gay.
Out gay director, and the designers, the choreographers, the music, everything about it. Really, check it out. It's a really terrific show. Now, the other shows we have. We have John Lithgow in The Columnist. Now, this is about, stay with me on this one, this is about Joseph Alsop, the most powerful columnist in the United States in the 50s and the 60s, intimate of presidents, relative of the Roosevelts.
He was at the Washington Post, right?
He was at the Washington Post. He wrote his column with other people, including his brother Stuart Alsop. And growing up, I remember those names, but I had no idea about the whole story here. This opens up in Moscow, okay, with him in bed, and a guy getting dressed, a young guy getting dressed. And that it plays he was a closeted gay man. And what he didn't realize was the KGB was taking pictures of him. This is all true, and used it against him throughout his entire life. He never came out. He married a woman later in life who knew his situation. But this is John Lithgow, he's nominated for a Tony. We're going to talk about some of the other Tony nominations. Boy, was that a great play. The Columnist.
You'd recommend it?
I do recommend
I'm
it.
going to go see it.
I wish I could. There's a play by a gay playwright called Tennessee Williams.
Who's that?
Called A Streetcar Named Desire. This is the one with Blair Underwood as Stanley, and you know. Unfortunately, I've seen so many. I saw The Greatest Streetcar Ever with Cate Blanchett as Blanche, and even though this is certainly a decent rendering of the play, it just doesn't really add anything to what I know about it. It's got Daphne Rubin Vega, and
she got her start in Rent.
Yes, and Nicole Ari Parker as Blanche in this case. But it's so I'm not so keen on that. The next show is The Lions. This is the one that was at the Vineyard. There's Linda Lavin, also nominated for a Tony, with Dick Latessa. He's dying of cancer. She's picking out curtains for the house and torturing him because she knows he's going to die, and she's finally going to get on with her life. She has a gay son. She has an alcoholic daughter. The family's a mess. It's by Nikki Silver, an out gay playwright, and it is one of the funniest things you're going to see on Broadway. It really is outrageous. And I also saw, I don't have a picture of this, I saw Ghost the Musical. I went with my friend Jed. He had a pretty good time, but it's a musical. I mean, it is a rendering of the movie Ghost on stage, and it's amazing what they do with the special effects.
Yeah, I hear the effects are great, and the staging's great.
But the music adds nothing.
Exactly, that's what I've heard.
So, although the African-American woman who was playing the Whoopi Goldberg role.
Moya Angela?
No, it's not Moya Angela, is it? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking it up. I'm looking through my program. Keep talking. Talk about what you saw this week there. Oda Mae Brown is played by Divine Joy Randolph, and she is worth the price of
What a
admission.
name, Divine Joy Randolph.
Yes, she is. So she's great. Okay. What else have we got? Well, we do have the Tony nominations.
Yeah.
You, of course, are going to be maybe interested in gay. I was, first of all, shocked to see Leap of Faith get a nomination.
I mean, I feel bad saying it, but I walked out of Leap of Faith at intermission. I mean, I couldn't bear it. Raul Esparza had some very good musical numbers.
Yeah.
It's a big production, but
I'm going to review it next week because I'm now sentenced to see it.
You're going to go see it?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of people who
you'll let us
liked
know
the
what you
show.
think.
A couple of people who've liked the show. But let's talk about some nominations that are of gay interest. Cynthia Nixon, out lesbian, was nominated for Wit for Best Actress in a Play. The Lions has gay content. Linda Lavin got a nomination there. John Lithgow got a nomination as Best Actor in a Play. It's not gay, but Venus and Fur, Nina Arianda. It's about an S&M relationship between a man and a woman. That got nominated. And of course, we always have to include Judy Garland in any kind of a gay roundup. Tracy Bennett got nominated for playing Judy Garland in End of the Rainbow, as did Michael Cumpsty, who plays a gay man, her accompanist in that show.
And Judith Light, who has been a stalwart for LGBT rights, got nominated for Other Desert Cities.
And for Best Book of a Musical, I don't know if all these guys are gay, but certainly Douglas Carter Bean is for Lysistrata Jones.
I saw it.
Which is Long Close. Did you like it?
I thought it was fun. I thought, you walked out of the theater with a smile on your face. It wasn't anything with huge substance, but the music was catchy, the crowd was engaged, and I enjoyed it.
And then somebody named Harvey Fierstein.
Harvey.
He wrote the book for the musical stage version of Newsies, which I'm picking to win Best Musical. So we're running out of time here, so we wish good luck to all of them and to all of you, and we thank you for being here. Corey, got any other news for us from your life? Anything you want to tell us?
I'm older and Anne's older. I want to look as good as Anne Northrup, in 10 years.
Everybody, we're taping live on Tuesday. We're live on Tuesday, so have a great May Day, and see you down at some of the demonstrations if you're watching live, and if you're not, we'll see you next week.
Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Take care.